What is good, everybody? Jagan here, and for the first time on my channel, I will be bringing you guys a Berserk video. And for those of you who don't know, Berserk is actually my favorite manga, so even though the channel is mostly dedicated to One Piece and Ippo content, I'll definitely be posting some Berserk videos from time to time, but of course due to the release schedule, that's not always the easiest thing to do. But without further ado, let's get into the Berserk Chapter 361 review, which we've been waiting for the last couple months. So after the long-anticipated cliffhanger, Skull Knight pulls up on Guts, and in typical Skull Knight fashion, he says that causality has led him here. Referring to their last encounter on the beach, Guts talks about when Skull Knight warned him of how dangerous walking the path of the Berserker armor can be, and how he was in fact able to make it here without any severe consequences to his senses. Skull Knight responds to this by saying, "Do not let your guard down, causality has yet to converge," which could imply more danger is coming here soon. You know, he and Guts have existed within the realm of causality even before the world started to undergo massive change. And Skull Knight is somebody who strikes the God Hand and gambles everything on temporal junction points, which we last saw him do at the end of Volume 34 when the Great Roar of the Astral World happened. So now with the state of the world in a massive global interstance, with the realms starting to fully merge, the opportunities for Skull Knight to strike down the God Hand are presumably going to be more common for him. Especially considering that Griffith is presumably on his way via the World Spiral Tree as the Moonlight Boy. So depending on the implications of that, it's very possible Elfhelm itself could be destined for danger very soon. It'd be very interesting to me to see Casca interact with the Moonlight Boy while she has her sanity, because the last time we did see them interact was on the Hill of Swords, where Griffith subconsciously protected her because of the Moonlight Boy's influence. So I'm wondering if Casca now would be able to connect those dots, and if Skull Knight would be able to tell that Griffith and the Moonlight Boy share a physical body. So Skull Knight being here and Casca regaining her sanity is a major game changer for the implications of what's to come. So back to the conversation, the Supreme Sorcerer Gedfrin interrupts Guts and Skull Knight's conversation and refers to Skull Knight as Your Majesty. And at this point, Miura is just kind of throwing it in our face. He's pretty much trolling us that Skull Knight is Geisric. And this instantly made me think back to the Eclipse, where we saw Slam be the first person to refer to Skull Knight as Your Majesty. And Skull Knight actually recognizes him as the son of someone called Vid. So many people are speculating that this could possibly be Void. And in katakana, it can also be Vito, which is also very similar. But Gedfrin and his father were granted many audiences with Skull Knight, so the fact that Skull Knight is 1,000 years old means Gedfrin himself is pretty old as well. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that old, because we know the flow of time in Elfhelm is different than in the outside world. But overall, this conversation is pretty funny. They talk about Guts and Skull Knight's relationship and how he just be pulling up and Guts can't get rid of him. But of course, they parallel each other in a lot of ways and have very common goals. But Gedfrin then brings up Hanar, a dwarf spirit of smithing and skilled craftsman, who actually forged both Guts and Skull Knight's armor. So this is really cool. I never actually expected to meet the person who made the Berserker armor. And I've also been really excited to learn more about dwarfs in Berserk. You know, we've been expanding on so many creatures in the astral world, but it's really cool how here on Elfhelm, we're able to expand on so many of these creatures, so much of this fantasy lore. So now we get into the best part of the chapter, and Morta has been a very interesting character to me throughout this arc. She's been interested in the outside world and all the adventures that the group has gone on. As if her talent's being wasted here, she doesn't like being cooped up in Elfhelm. And I actually like how in the previous chapter they highlighted Sherky and Farney's growth, their exceptional growth in magic as a result of actual combat experience, putting their lives on the line in high-risk situations, which forced them to develop their skills quicker than normal. But we actually see Sherky training with her broom, trying to get the feel of flying on the broom, and it has something to do with barites, which is a weight element, something that was introduced earlier in Elfhelm, which basically ties together the four great elements of fire, earth, water, and wind, as well as do things like make objects heavy, darken the sky, produce things like depression and obsession in the mind, kind of, I guess, implementing dark concepts. So mastering this power is very versatile, and it makes sense that flying on the broom is also indicative of this barite element, because I'm assuming that you have to lighten your weight in order to fly. The other witches around say it might not come as naturally to such a serious and bookish girl, because Sherky's being a little too uptight, she's not relaxing enough. She's not able to deal with and control the barites, which leads Morta to come here and assist Sherky, because we know earlier in the chapter she took an interest in what Guts and Skull Knight were doing, where they were heading. So she tells Sharky that you'll pick it up much quicker if someone actually flies you. That seeing someone more experienced actually do it is much more effective, which leads us to some really cool looking panels of them flying in the air. I've really liked the aesthetic of Elfhelm overall and the transition to digital as well. I can definitely see why people wouldn't prefer digital compared to what we've gotten in the past, especially when it comes to character designs overall, but to me, Miura hasn't missed when depicting scenery and background in this arc. So this leads us to Morta talking about how she's the best on the island when it comes to brooms, and she hates how boring the lectures are from all those old men, which goes back to what I was talking about with practical experience in serious situations, versus basically being at school, learning through theories and lessons. I definitely like this contrast in personalities between these two witches, with Morta being more loud, outgoing, and bold, compared to Sharky's quiet and shy nature. But I'd really like to see Morta have a more prominent role going forward, if not flat out just joining the group after Elfhelm. It would definitely fit her personality to go out and see the world, and given who they're up against, some powerful mages as allies against these apostles would be very, very helpful. So next we see them head down the ravine after being intrigued by where Guts, Gedfried, and Skull Knight are heading. Sharky senses a different feeling down here than from the elven lands above, getting a similar feeling to one of the God-Hand member Slan's region's Kleepoth. We see a couple weird looking creatures who are just kind of chilling for the most part, as well as some Wickermen, which was one of the bigger golems Morta used to attack them when they first entered Elfhelm. And Morta talks about how these Wickermen were created as a result of being attacked by a great kingdom from long ago. Captured enemy soldiers were sacrificed to create these. The former sounds a lot like King Geyser's conquest, how he subjugated dozens of nations and formed an entire empire encompassing the entire continent. And I don't think it's a coincidence that we get this info in the same chapter that we hear someone call Skull Knight Your Majesty again for the first time in a while. If it was in fact Geyser, then maybe even the possibility exists that his conquest could have been in an age similar to what is transpiring now, where magic, apostles, and all kinds of fantasy creatures existed in a global inner sense before the doctrine of the Holy See took over and influenced the minds of so many people. So I think in due time, we will have some concrete answers to questions like this. These Wickermen also got me thinking we might learn more about the dark arts or sacrificial magic. Morta even said that these kind of things are now even considered taboo earlier in the arc when they first attacked them. And we are also introduced to Morta's master, an old witch named Volfapa, who's a master of curses and manipulated souls, so she would definitely be the person who could give us more info on that. Maybe there's even a chance she could know a way to get rid of the brand of sacrifice, or perhaps repress it enough for Casca and Guts to an even greater extent than what Flora did for them with the seal back in the Falcon of the Millennium Empire arc. After Sharky and Morta leave her presence, she talks about the guest being, of all possible things, one of Flora's, as well as the Death's Head Horseman, and that the talk of those sleep-addled fools is actually coming true. Does this imply some sort of prophecy revolving around them that the great elders of Elfhelm have been speaking about? Obviously Flora and Skull Knight have a history going far back, so maybe some big event that has to do with Sharky and Guts will come to fruition on Elfhelm. And earlier I talked about the possibility of Elfhelm getting attacked, even if Griffith coincidentally is on his way here because of the Moonlight Boar. It also just makes sense for him or some of his war demons to invade Elfhelm anyway, due to the massive magical prowess that is here. He even already attacked Flora's Spirit Woods because it was feeding off the World Spiral Tree, so too many things add up for Elfhelm to undergo some sort of danger or conflict soon. So the two finally catch up to the group down in the dark, tight area that dwarves are more accustomed with, to which Guts, Skull Knight, and Gedfried finally meet up with Hanar, and his appearance instantly reminds him of his blacksmith Godo. And a lot of people have kind of been speculating that Godo might be a dwarf because of his height and the fact that the mountain area he lived in was isolated and full of energy from when elves used to roam freely. But I think as of right now that might be a stretch. But perhaps could suggest another parallel between Guts and Skull Knight, since Flora was a mage he worked with in the past and Hanar appears to be his blacksmith the way Guts has Sharky currently and had Godo as a blacksmith previously. But Hanar actually refers to Skull Knight as Keen, which is yet another hint implying Keen Geyser. So I'd be pretty surprised if we didn't get some major answers about Skull Knight's past within the next couple chapters. He doesn't necessarily 100% have to be King Geyser, but all the hints are adding up to this, so I could definitely see a route in which Miura decides that Skull Knight is not in fact King Geyser, but it would have to be extremely well crafted, which I'm sure he's more than capable of doing. So it's one of those situations where I'm sure we'll be satisfied regardless, and that it will be done very well. Hadar also talks about how Skull Knight hasn't slipped from the mortal coil yet, hyping up the job that he's done with his work. But it has me thinking, what exactly Skull Knight himself is, and of course what the hell is that armor that he's currently wearing. Skull Knight was the previous user of the Berserker armor who apparently had his body devoured by it. In my opinion, it's very possible Skull Knight became a daemon after dying as a result of the armor. Daemons were introduced last chapter when Gedfrin suggested this idea to Shirke as a possibility with her next step in her magic prowess, and even stated that Flora, Shirke's former mentor, is one of them. They are the spirits of certain heroes and sorcerers who were once human, who exist in a very deep layer of the astral realm. So I think the possibility that Skull Knight is in fact a daemon exists, and that he was somehow able to be binded to the armor he wears, that Hanar was able to construct something powerful enough to do this and not have Skull Knight slip away from the physical realm, sort of like what the Elric brothers did with Alphonse's soul being binded to the armor. It would make sense how Skull Knight was able to exist in the Innerstance for so long. He's been attacking the God Hand at these temporal junction points way longer than even Guts has, so I'd be surprised if he wasn't connected to daemons at all. So Hanar's reaction to seeing both these sets of armor again is actually pretty funny. He responds to Skull Knight's statement about being in good health, saying he's just rattling in his coffin, almost as if he doesn't really even approve of Skull Knight's current quest. He has kind of a similar reaction to the Berserker armor. He seems surprised that anyone else would be crazy enough to wield it again, but also gives Guts a little bit of praise that he's managed to get some good use out of it so far, which leads us to one of the best topics of the chapter, and it's the fact that Hanar mentions just because you've used it doesn't mean you've mastered it, to which Gedfrin just sort of hits the armor with the hammer to activate it and is presumably going to gauge Guts' ability to control the armor. We all know how easily this armor can consume its host. It has a violent odd that draws out and manifests negative emotions, so this may be where Guts finally can learn to fully manifest and control his rage to maximize the power of the Berserker armor. Obviously for a while now he's gotten help from Shirke to help himself control this armor, to control his rage while wielding it, so he may learn to be able to do this by himself now. Or maybe it's something even more to that, something even more to mastering that Hanar can teach him about the armor. These implications truly make it feel like the endgame is coming. Shirke and Farnese leveling up their magic, Guts potentially mastering or even upgrading the Berserker armor. Skull Knight himself pulling up to Elfhelm, where we finally might learn all the secrets that have intrigued us for so many years about him. The Moonlight Boy potentially on his way. How will Casca deal with her trauma and react to these potential scenarios? Will we see Skull Knight and Guts potentially clash or spar next chapter? Maybe we'll finally get a proper gauge for Skull Knight's current strength. And like Skull Knight said, causality has yet to converge. This is the calm before the storm, and I've really been enjoying these latest chapters. Obviously the hiatus is tough for all of us, but Miura is doing an excellent job with the lore in Berserk and setting us up for some potentially insane events. So let's hope he can continue to build off this and release some chapters more frequently. Let me know what you guys thought of my review and if you'd like to see more Berserk content in the future. Would also love to hear your guys' thoughts on this chapter and what you guys think is in store for not only Elfhelm but the future of Berserk as a whole. So I'm Jagon Guts and would appreciate you guys subbing to the channel and dropping a like here. Much more content coming soon, and I will see you guys next time.